On this computer. All right. All right. So welcome, everyone. We're going to be doing a few sessions over the coming 3 weeks or so, working through a new figure within our Wednesday reading group, which is the figure of Vladimir Vernadsky. And the reason why we're going to do this is because there has been obviously a huge push to try to get across the idea that human society must model our existence off of the laws of nature. And according to current doctrines that are very hegemonic, especially in terms of ecosystems management, a lot of the ideas prevalent around the Davos crowd trying to push the idea of a great reset. The idea of what nature is that we should model ourselves on has a few poisonous and wrong assumptions embedded within it. Number one being that nature itself is supposedly something as one system which seeks always equilibrium and stasis as its natural state. The fact is, while you could choose to make that conclusion and you could try to input into your computer models as much of the data, the cycles of carbon, the cycles of silicon, the cycles of nitrogen, and other things we find in nature within ecosystems, and you could add up all of those variables, all of those parameters, and call whatever your computer model then measures, you could call that an ecosystem, which is by definition, by having been processed through a binary computing digital system, it is intrinsically a whole that is the sum of its parts. You could do that, but you'd be wrong, because where did the ecosystems today come from? You know, we have a certain amount of bounty, we have a certain amount of expected cycles that we see within the forces of nature. We have a certain amount of diversity, a certain amount of complexity, a set of interrelationships of different species that have come into being, that have a certain harmony. But where did they come from? At some point earlier, we had a very different set of relationships in earlier ecosystems. And before that, we didn't really have ecosystems before a certain moment happened when life all of a sudden found itself in a very simple stage, unicellular, moving around in a relatively boring fashion on the earth. Also, where's this going? And what is the role of human beings within this context? So if we take a step back from this myopic vision of trying to treat the ecosystems that we are supposedly just another member of, right? And just another species of monkey that is supposed to adapt to the natural equilibrium or the pristine balance. If we actually take a step back, we start seeing that no, not only is there no pristine balance, there is harmony, but it's not this mathematical balance of stasis. We start seeing that there is, in fact, a perfectibility, a function of creative leaping beyond the limits of whatever was there at one space in time. And human beings are indeed a part of nature. And we should, I think that it's true. We should try to model our behavior around what nature is doing even before there were humans. But again, is the mind that allows us to make our discoveries, to translate them into new technologies, is that power a part of nature, or is that something outside of nature that causes disequilibrium? And so today, by reading some of Vernadsky's original writings, who is somebody who is an exceptional human being, a real outstanding mind, the president of the Russian Academy of Sciences for a sustained period. He was the founder of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences. And he was somebody who made so many bloody discoveries in atomic physics, in mineralogy, soil science, even human economy. It's hard to just place his discoveries into one little mini box, because he was so multidisciplinary in his thinking. He even created the field of biogeochemistry. It did not exist before him, because he realized if you want to study geology, you have to look at the role of life. Biology. You can't look at life without looking at geology. You can't look at chemistry unless you look at both biology and geology. And you can't look at all three of those things, unless you're looking at the formation of planetary systems, because all of the suns of the galaxy are producing, through processes we don't understand, they're generating the atomic elements that become embedded within certain orbits around various suns and take the form of things that we mine and we use for our industrial and other needs. So anyway, we have this amazing process where human beings are part of nature, but nature is something more than it is. And somebody's making a little bit of noise. I don't know where that is coming from. Doesn't matter. So the first essay by Vernadsky that we'll read was published in a book called Scientific Thought as a Planetary Phenomenon. And it's a wonderful extract from this larger book that was published in 1929. Keeping in mind as well, Vernadsky was an enemy of, he was born in 1864 or 1863. He died in 1945. It's a very dense period of potential. He was an enemy of the dialectic materialists who had been trying to gain total dominance over Russian science, especially around Trotsky. You know, in the 1920s, Trotsky was the scientific czar of Russian science and industry, and his assignment was to impose dialectic materialism on the interpretation of all science, which is just the idea that quantity always causes quality. One of the assumptions of the dialectic materialist ideology is you always have to assume that a quantitative idea, a quantitative process always shapes and causes whatever appears to be qualitative. So in the mind of a Trotsky or a dialectic materialist, not a Vernadsky, what would cause, you know, one element on the periodic table of being different qualitatively from another is simply the quantity of electron orbitals. Vernadsky, in many of his writings, as does Mendeleev earlier, Vernadsky's teacher is Mendeleev, they take aim at this completely. They always get at the point that people like Plato or Confucius always aim at, which is that it is first and foremost qualities that shape the quantization and that give meaning to the quantization we find in nature. There is quantization, right? Mathematics does have a certain relationship to the physical universe, but it's not the mathematics that leads in the dance. The physical universe leads in the dance, always. And this is what gives the room for the mind to move in a more productive way. So I'm gonna do a little screen share, and we'll just start. We'll do probably one reader per hour, maybe. We'll see how it goes. If people want to stop at any moment and pose a question, I'll probably stop it occasionally, say a word or two. Feel free to just jump in. The translation here was made by a figure named Bill Jones, who is a leading representative of the Schiller organization. It was published actually in a now non-existent magazine called 21st Century Science and Technology in 2012. The link to accessing the full issue that this article was or essay was published in is going to be in the description box of this video. And again, this is okay. So this is called From the Biosphere to the Noosphere. The Noosphere being the domain of mind, right? The Greek word nous for mind was the term that Vernadsky coined. Actually, somebody who is less than a humanist first coined the term as a word namely Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit neo-Darwinist, who coined the word noosphere to mean something rather mystical. Vernadsky had a battle with Chardin to take control and infuse substance and meaning into the term noosphere. That was much superior to anything that Chardin had tried to do. And how this domain of the noosphere relates to both the biosphere, but also the abiosphere, the world of chemistry, physics, and how all three domains of space-time, the non-living, the living, and the thinking, coexist and interact in a lawful way. So who would like to start the reading, which is broken down into sort of little mini gestalts, thought concepts? Do you have a volunteer?
Oh, I'll start.
All right, so Tomi.
Okay.
Cool. And who wants to do the footnotes? Not every footnote, but sometimes we have a footnote that has a few that's a little bit longer. I don't know, Kwan, you want to do those?
Yeah. Are they at the end? Because I don't see any footnotes.
They're all at the bottom of each page.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, but where you just have like a title of a book or something, don't worry about reading it. It's just when he has like a few sentences to elaborate on something, then we'll read it.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, from the Biosphere to the Noosphere by Vladimir Vernadsky. Excerpts from Scientific Thought as a Planetary Phenomenon, Chapter 7. The sciences concerned with the biosphere and its objects, that is, all of the humanities without exception, the natural sciences, in the proper sense of the term, botany, zoology, geology, mineralogy, etc., all the technical sciences, applied sciences, broadly understood, appear as areas of knowledge which are the most accessible to the scientific thought of man. Here we have concentrated millions upon millions of continuous scientifically established and systematized facts, which are the results of organized scientific labor, and which inexorably results increase with each new generation rapidly and consciously since the 15th to the 17th centuries. In particular, the scientific disciplines dealing with the structure of the instruments of scientific cognition, indissolubly linked to the biosphere, may be scientifically viewed as geological factor, a manifestation of the manner in which the biosphere is organized. There are sciences dealing with the spiritual creativity of the human individual in his social environment, the sciences of the brain and of the sense organs, of the problems of psychology or logic. These conditions, in quest for the fundamental laws of man's scientific cognition, that is, those powers which have transformed the biosphere encompassed by man into a natural body, new in its geological and biological processes, into a new state, the noosphere. Considerations of which I will turn to below. Its creation beginning intensively in the measure of historical time, some tens of thousands of years ago, was an occurrence of extreme importance in our planetary history, connected above all with the growth of the science of the biosphere, and it was definitely not by chance. We may therefore state the biosphere represents the fundamental sphere of scientific knowledge, although only now are we on the point of distinguishing it from its surrounding reality.
Great. Going to go for footnote number 2.
Yes. I will return later to that process. Here I will merely indicate the thought of Le Roi. Deux grands faits devant lesquels tous les autres semblent presque s'évanouir dominent donc l'histoire passée de la Terre. La vitalisation de la matière, puis l'hominisation de la vie. Okay, for those who don't speak French, two great facts before whom all the others seems to be not important, dominate the past history of the Earth, the vitalization of matter and the hominization of life.
Thank you.
Number
3, he didn't read yet, I don't think. Did he?
okay.
Huh, it's weird. It doesn't even come up, eh? Oh yeah, it's down there. It's down there. Number in the next section.
Okay. Is it maybe it's good to read it now because it seems to be important.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Okay, so that structure is quite distinctive. It is not a mechanism, nor is it something stationary. It is dynamic, ever-changing, mobile. In each instance, changing itself and never returning to a previous form of equilibrium. The closest to it is the living organism, distinguishing itself, however, from it in its physical geometrical state of its space. Space of the biosphere is heterogeneous in its physical geometrical dimension. I think that it is proper to assign to that structure a specific notion of organization. I just want to make a comment. Okay, it's incredible because we know now that in molecular biology, the 3D structure of a protein has a certain importance. And was it Vernadsky that wrote that note, or?
I think it was. I think it was.
Okay, because he died in 1945, and 3D molecular biology was not so developed, so he had an incredible insight here.
Yeah, he writes a lot on the need to think of the structure, the physical space-time structure of life as having a non-homogeneous, because if you're a mathematician trying to use a mathematical abstract, you know, let's say you want to have like a Euclidean mapping in your mind that you use to then try to navigate as an analog physical reality, it won't work. It's Euclidean space-time is linear, it's homogeneous. There's no difference between one space versus another space within the, you know, the XYZ axis. There's nothing really qualitatively differentiating one space for another. Whereas Vernadsky's always very clear, no, real space is not like that. There is qualitative distinctness in a heterogeneous fashion everywhere.
Yeah, it's physical geometrical dimension that it is proper to assign to that structure a specific notion of organization. He was 3 generations in advance.
Yeah. Well, Kepler was like 15 generations in advance, because Kepler's talking about this too.
Oh, okay. So Kepler was 15 in generation in advance.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, like he says, these are sciences dealing with the spiritual creativity of the human individual in his social environment, the sciences of the brain and of the sense organs, of the problems of psychology or logic. Now, which ones are they all considered spiritual?
Yes, and from a proper perspective, if you're not an oligarch, then the sciences are the place where, regardless of the label of what particular science, it's the place where you are coming to know truth and trying to seek it out by coming into communion with the laws of nature, whether, you know, human laws, in, you know, mind laws, whatever, chemical laws, but you're basically coming into communion with God's mind. And that's Vernadsky's standpoint, though he will tend to not use such theological language. He's you know, but that's where he's coming from. Yes.
Thank you.
Sure. So Tomi, you want to keep going? Your reading is wonderful. So Tomi, you still there?
I'm glad Kwan's doing the footnotes because I can't see that.
Oh, it's fine. Yeah,
but
good.
I can read this. It is clear from the foregoing that the biosphere is equivalent to nature in the ordinary sense of the term. As this term is used in the deliberation of the naturalists and in philosophical discussions, where it does not refer to the cosmos at large, but rather to the phenomena contained within the bounds of Earth. In particular, it corresponds to the naturalist's nature. Not only is this nature not amorphous and without form, as was thought for centuries, but rather it possesses a determined, well-defined structure, which as such must be reflected and taken into consideration in all the conclusions and deductions relating to nature. See, that thing I have to think about. In scientific investigations, it is especially important not to forget this and to examine it, since unconsciously science or scientists and scholars, when contrasting the human individual with nature, are overwhelmed by the grandeur of nature against the human individual. But life in all its manifestations, including the activity of the human individual, radically transforms the biosphere to the degree that not only the aggregate of indivisible life, but even some problems of the solitary individual person in the noosphere cannot remain without consideration in the biosphere.
So right now, all he's doing is he's defining his terms. He's not really saying anything beyond helping people to know what they're talking about when they use the terms, and getting his audience into his mind, which is a much more elevated understanding of the individual, what causes the noosphere, what causes the biosphere, right? Otherwise, a lot of people read words, and we often encounter this, right, where our ideas of the words we use are very different from the same words being used by somebody else, and you realize after speaking to them for like a while that you've been talking about two different things. And he's trying to get everybody on the same wavelength currently. And I think this picture is pretty good too, just to quickly illustrate the growth from 1987 to 2012 of the same patch of desert that would normally not really have much biomass there if not for the presence of human beings, who in the case of this is Saudi Arabia. Obviously, it could have been done. I think an argument can be made that the greening, the farming of the deserts by tapping into underground water aquifers was done a little messily. But still, the fact is, it does demonstrate a proof of principle that we have now biomass in a desert caused by human thought, which, again, the argument is this thus natural or unnatural? And if it is natural, then how do we define nature, if that's the case? And keeping in mind too, right? Oh, go on.
Nature is everything that is possible.
There you go. Although, but then you could say too, some really bad things could be possible, right? The mass extermination of human beings could be possible, and so.
Well, that's the destructive dimension of nature through the human mind.
Well,
we can argue that the human mind is probably the last game of nature. Or maybe it would be a bit pretentious to say that. Mind in general, and human mind would be a category of mind.
I guess then does nature have does it favor a type of activity of mind over another type of activity of mind that is more or less natural to what nature favors or disfavors, I guess?
Yes, but here we are entering in a theological debate. Is mind necessarily creative? It could be destructive too, or the destructive dimension of mind is part of its creativity.
Are you saying that when we destroy ourselves or cause just destruction in general, that's necessarily a part of creativity?
Yes. Well, if the destruction phase is something that opens up a creative phase, it could be seen as positive if you want. Okay, but
some types of destruction that destroy higher creative potentials, like let's say we decide to launch nuclear weapons all over the world, then that destroys a lot of creative potential that would have otherwise have been had we not chosen to do the stupid thing.
Yes, but stupid things is part of the possibilities of the mind. And I return to my initial definition. Nature is everything that is possible. You can define stupidity as something existential or the absence of critical thinking. We have another debate here.
Sure.
I prefer the second answer, but I would not dare to say that I have the final answer.
I prefer. Anybody else want to chime in with that, or should we read on?
Our mind is just like an extension of nature.
Absolutely. Or maybe it's the most open part of nature, capable to read God's mind precisely.
Like in an evolutionary kind of way, like our brains, like our frontal lobes, or like that's something new. Like all the other animals in our world, like their brains are smaller.
Sure.
So whatever we have as humans, it's something more. It's something added on. something new.
Yeah.
But dolphins have really big brains too, compared to even like even pygmies or even normal human being sized people.
Yeah.
The dolphin brain is still bigger.
Yeah, but you have to take into account another fact. The size is not everything. It's also the number of synaptic connection, and we truly are the champions on Earth.
Well, we're the only ones that can speak.
Yeah, we have an average of 10,000 synaptic connections per contact. So we are truly the champion for now. I don't mean that we might discover new things in the future, but for now we are the top.
I got a paradox question. If am I right or wrong, Quan, as a psychiatrist, would somebody like who lacks the use of their sight or hearing have fewer synaptic connections in their brain than somebody who has all full faculties intact?
Please repeat your question, please.
Would somebody who is blind or deaf have fewer synaptic connections available to them than somebody who has all 5 senses intact?
Okay, that's a big question, because even if the synaptic connection corresponding to the eyes, for example, would be less active, but it's possible that there is an overcompensation in the tactile regions, for example. So I would not give an answer straight away like that, because of the compensation phenomenon.
What do you mean by syntax?
The synapse, you mean? Okay, the synapse is the region of contact between two neurons, okay, two brain cells. And in that region, and it could be interesting in relation with Vernadsky, because he was speaking of space, okay? And a synapse is a space of communication between two neurons using electricity and molecules to transmit messages. And on average, we have per neurons, we have 10,000 synaptic contacts. Okay, and imagine that we have 10 exponent 11 axons or neurons in our brain. So it's 10 exponent 15 possibility, because so 10 exponent 11 times 10 exponent 4 for 10,000.
So we have more synapses than dolphins?
For now, we are the champions on Earth. It doesn't exclude future discoveries, but for now, we are at the top.
And just keep in mind the fallacy of the dialectic materialist, because the quantity is important, but it's not the reason why we're smarter necessarily, or we have more potential for fruitful thought than another species. There must be another reason, but that's a guiding post. But
and once again, both can be true. Okay, the problem of those materialists that they are mesmerized by their first explanation, in the sense that maybe you need a certain number of synaptic contact to reach to a certain faculty, but that faculty, in order to be developed, needs things who cannot be quantified. Okay, relation, friendship, love, communication, things like that. Can they be quantified? Because all human babies are born with the potential to talk, because the baby has an area of Broca and of Wernicke in his or her brain. But without human interaction, those two zones would be useless.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yep, agreed. Charles just wrote, Douglas Adams might disagree on the dolphin question. I appreciate that. Okay, cool. Shall we continue on to section or part 102, idea 102?
102, yeah. Starting with living nature.
Sure.
Okay.
So Tomi, you wanna keep going for it?
Okay. living nature is a fundamental trait of the manifestation of the biosphere, and by this clearly distinguishes itself from the Earth's other envelopes. The structure of the biosphere is characterized first and foremost by life. We see below that there lies in a number of aspects an unbridgeable gulf between the physical, geometric properties with regard to the weight and quantity of the atoms in living organisms. In the biosphere, they are manifested in the form of their aggregate living substance, and such properties in inert matter, which comprises the overwhelming part of the biosphere, Living matter is the bearer for and creator of free energy, not existing to such a degree in any of one of Earth's envelopes. This free energy, biogeochemical energy, embraces the entire biosphere and fundamentally determines its entire history. It stimulates and radically transforms the intensity of the migration of the chemical elements which compose the biosphere and determines its geological significance.
Okay, I read note
Wow.
4. Yes,
Wow.
free energy. Okay,
Yeah.
note 4. Do you want to say something, Satomi?
Well, no, like that, you got to unpack that.
Yeah, like living matter, is free energy.
Yeah, well, it's the consequence of the creation of free energy. It couldn't exist had there not been the creation of free energy continuously. Here, let's read the footnote 4, and then we can unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, so the concept of biogeochemical energy came to me in 1925 in a still unpublished paper for the L. Rosenthal Fund. The fund is no longer in existence. This fund gave me the opportunity to quietly devote myself to this work over the course of 2 years, and a series of articles and books from this research are therefore in print.
And then there's the list of all the different. I don't know if these are available. I'd like to think that some of them are, and I know a couple are. I wonder if they're available in English. But yeah.
And it's a biogeochemical energy.
How would you define biogeochemical energy? Like okay, embraces the entire, is that like every molecule, every cell?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it means it's a systems approach. So Vernadsky is taking the approach of the system being defined as a non-zero sum system. Kind of like today, you've got a battle between either there's two different ideas of what the human system should be. One is a Hobbesian, what's called zero sum system, that the whole is the sum of its parts. And thus, because they assume that, and they thus assume, and I'm talking about the great reset ideologues, because they assume that we live in this closed system with a sum of parts, that as the parts move, there's a diminishing rate of return of the available energy to maintain the system. So the system is intrinsically wiring down to heat death. And it's always a battle over diminishing returns in that ideology. Whereas the opposing view, which is, I think, the more natural view, is that the system is more than the sum of its parts, because that one allows for the idea of creative change, new discoveries, metaphysical ideas that are outside of the physical terms of the system that allow the system to grow, right? So Vernadsky saying, well, if the system is always inclined to grow in a directional way, what gives it the energy to have an upward qualitative growth? Unless there's more energy being produced than is being needed and consumed within the system. Because if it's just enough, if the system is always consuming more than it produces, then there is no free energy. There's always negative energy causing less energy to go around to maintain the biosphere or the human system, whatever.
Are you talking like about the energy from the sun?
That's a factor, and the galaxy,
And
but also from the atoms within the molecules, right? Within the metabolic power of the species, right? What accounts for that type of species pressure, right? And every time you breathe in air, you breathe out oxygen, you eat food, you excrete the garbage, goes back into nature. And so there's these cycles and these rhythms. What causes the frequency of these rhythms to move in a direction, right? And there's all sorts of chemicals in the periodic table that life relates to, some more than others, right? And it's not the same. If you take a snapshot and you just measure the patterns, the rhythms a million years ago or 100 million years ago or a billion years ago or a million years in the future, there's going to be different rhythms, different norms, right? Is it chaotic? Is it random? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? What are those? What are the variables we can hook our minds onto, you know? And Vernadsky's trying to give us the mental tools to understand what we're dealing with.
yeah,
You
and the
know,
fact. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
you know, like I really been grappling with what Tesla said about Nikola Tesla, that because of course he was the whole free energy. But he says that there's so much atoms are like they're asleep. They need to be awakened. So that's even more energy. Just think of maybe more energy is asleep than awakened. You know, I don't know how to, but do you understand what I'm saying? Like he says there's no empty space. It's just matter that's asleep. That's you know, it's just not awakened yet. Like, can you imagine the energy?
It's a beautiful idea.
Yeah. So I just thought that would be, I'll put that in so that maybe we'll never, it's inexhaustible, infinite.
I'd go with that.
Yeah, but I would like to read just one line. Living matter is the bearer for and the creator of free energy. And I tend to have a psychological interpretation, okay? Because once again, if the human mind is capable to create the PZ0, that's science fiction stuff, capable to create infinite energy from the variation of emptiness with a capital P, meaning multi-potential energy, it would fulfill what it says here, that matter, that living matter is the bearer and the creator of free energy. Not the only interpretation, but one's possible interpretations.
Mm-hmm.
Then you mean, so are you saying, Quan, that there are matter that are destroyed? It's like they're dead.
No. No, my interpretation is much more down to earth. Okay, living matter. We human beings are living matter. Okay, yeah. If we manage to create confusion, or the science fiction stuff called the PZ0, which is a machine to harvest the energy from the universe, from the variation of emptiness of the void with capital V. Wow, that would be the ultimate mission accomplished. Because theoretically it's possible, but we need a very open mind to create the path to that extraction or harvesting of energy from the variation of emptiness of void. Here, emptiness means the space of multi-potentialities, of course.
Yeah, well, you're saying like like you're awaken. If you awaken more new energy.
Not inside me, but inside my mind, or inside the mind of any human being evolved enough to develop that PZ0 machine, or the fusion energy, for example. You know that there are some artificial suns that are being run on Earth, but not completely accomplished. Imagine, I'm not even speaking of PZ0, even those tokamak, if those tokamak can be built and commercialized, all our energy problem will be solved. Okay, not even speaking of PZ0.
Yep. Yeah. Baby steps. But
Yeah. Well, it would be a major baby step waiting for the PZ0.
well, yeah, and this gets us back to I think what Vernadsky's getting at, because we didn't even finish the section yet. But what we're seeing with this idea of free energy is something that is more clearly visible in the human system, that because it's so dramatic. We've gone from 400 million of our species members 500 years ago on the earth to almost 8 billion today. So that's a very big dramatic increase, which has associated leaps into better forms of energy, better qualities of fire, like LaRouche often writes in his material, that allows us to extract a greater density of energy when we heat up wood compared to, or coal compared to wood, or petrochemicals compared to petroleum compared to coal, or atomic fission gives us a greater matter energy conversion than anything we could get with chemical fuels. And then with fusion, it's an even greater magnitude leap. When you combine lighter elements through fusion processes, then an even greater amount of that mass transforms to energy, which, if we can harness, allows for a massive increase in the quantity and quality of life of people, how many people can exist, how much life you can support, and how much you could do really to desalinate water and other things that are impossible in states of greater ignorance. So we see that more clear. But what's fun that Vernadsky gets at is that we also see this in nature. When you take a step back and look at the long cycles of nature, we also see a similar analog behavior of nature itself without even human beings intervening. New type of biotechnologies like chlorophyll show up on the scene. Things that didn't exist in the previous system appear. And that also has a certain quality, though you have to be more patient, that we see in human life. And Vernadsky's going to get at that I'm sure he's going to get at that in the next section here. I'm sorry. So Tomi, do you want to jump back onto the Vernadsky?
Okay. During the past 10,000 years, a new form of this energy has been created within the realm of living substance, even more intense and complex, and rapidly growing in importance. This new form of energy, associated with the vital activities of human society, of the genus Homo, and other closely related genera, hominids, while preserving the expression of ordinary biogeochemical energy, brings about simultaneously new forms of migration of chemical elements, which in their diversity and power leave the ordinary biochemical energy of the living matter of the planet far behind. This new form of biogeochemical energy, which might be called the energy of human culture or cultural biogeochemical energy, is that form of biogeochemical energy which creates at the present time the noosphere. Later, I will return to a more detailed exposition and analysis of our understanding of the noosphere. But at the moment, it is only necessary for me to present a brief outline of its manifestation on our planet. This form of biogeochemical energy is proper not only to Homo sapiens, but to all living organisms. However, among these, this energy appears insignificant compared with ordinary biogeochemical energy, and is barely noticeable in the balance of nature, and then only on the scale of geological time. It is associated with the mental activity of organisms, with the development of the brain and higher forms of life, and only with the appearance of reason do its effects produce the form of transition of the biosphere into the noosphere. Its manifestation in the predecessors of man was probably developed over the course of hundreds of millions of years, but it was able to express itself as geological force only in our time, when Homo sapiens has embraced the entire biosphere with its life and cultural work.
Well,
What's that, Kelly?
I says, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's a
Cool.
cool. Oh, there's a footnote too. Yeah, it's just he's just citing his work on the biosphere, which is a wonderful book that is available for purchase on Amazon even now. Yeah, no, it's really I think that this is just gold, and the idea of the cultural biogeochemical energy is also a very interesting idea, right? That certain cultures, which is, I mean, it's a spiritual thing, culture. It's not material in that sense, but it has material effects. So you could look at two different cultures, two different cultural systems in play, and see how they induce a different measurable, relatively measurable set of relationships to human beings, to energy, and also to nature as a whole, based on their level of knowledge or ignorance of certain facts of nature, certain, ignorance of certain technologies that another culture has, which I think this whole line of thinking could get you kicked out of university, because if you're a relativist, like a cultural relativist, which you kind of have to be if you're going to be in academia, you're not allowed to think in these terms, because it leads you into the danger of being able to judge in some way the advancement or not of different cultures, which you're not supposed to do. All cultures are supposed to be created as equal, irregardless of their level of whether you're dealing with a cannibal society or whether you're dealing with a society that doesn't do that. They're all equal.
Yeah. Well, that whole cultural work, I mean, is quite significant, because that takes in all the arts and man's effort. Like, man is so part of culture. You can't separate humans from culture. So that's shows you. I mean, what I'm getting so far is how important man is as part of this whole creation.
Yep.
It's funny you're talking about cultures. I'm right now I'm raising a bread. I have this bread culture I've had for, I don't know, 7 years. And over time, you learn, like, it's almost like having a pet around the house. Like this, this bread culture, it matures over time.
I am so ignorant. What is a bread culture?
What is a bread culture?
Something? What are we talking
about? Like, sourdough bread.
Yeah.
Like, basically, around here, I can't get good rye bread anymore. So I had to learn how to make it myself. And that was years ago. And, by trial and error, I learned that, like, these little bacterias, they, like, I don't know what's in my culture, but I do know that, like, everything's in it. It's not just one strain of bacteria. There's, like, all kinds, and they all kind of combine with each other. And like, it can get sick. It has good days, it has bad days. And well, today's a good day for making bread. That's all.
I never thought of this. That's and just to be, I don't want to deflect from the text too much, but I'm fascinated. Are you saying that for 7 years you've maintained the same bacterial culture that you can then draw upon when you go and make your sourdough bread? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And now that it's at least 7 years old, and now it's so mature that you don't have to fondle it, you don't have to take care of it and coddle it. Like, it can handle heat, it can handle cold, it can handle say somebody comes in the house with a smelly dog, and part of the dog gets into the culture somehow. It doesn't matter, because it's developed its own resistance to like, all kinds of things in life.
I'm seeing the germ for a horror movie right now.
Well, Well, when you start it, like when you start a culture in the beginning,
Yeah.
The bread doesn't turn out very well. It's like soury, and
Yeah.
it doesn't rise very well. But somehow, all by itself, it just it kind of it strengthens itself.
I hear
It
you.
does it all by itself.
That's super cool. Super cool.
Yeah, and I love the idea. I think you can give that culture to someone else, right? And then they can have their own bread. I mean,
Yeah, there's people,
it's
you know,
so
they trade and stuff, you know.
well, there's just such a communion there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Anyway,
definitely a metaphor. I think, yeah, a certain metaphor for what Vernadsky is saying, and embedded in embedded in what you're talking about.
Embedded.
So okay, so we've dealt with now human sapiens and our culture as part of this biospheric process of nature that we're zeroing in on. Let's see where else he goes with this, with section 103. So Tomi, you're a great reader. Like, keep it going.
okay, the biogeochemical energy of living matter is determined primarily by the reproduction of organisms, by their unremitting endeavor determined by the energetics of the planet to achieve a minimum of free energy, determined by the fundamental laws of thermodynamics corresponding to the existence and stability of the planet. It is expressed in the respiration and alimentation of living organisms by the laws of nature, which is the present time had not found a mathematical expression, although the task of discovering such was clearly poised already in the 1782 by Christian Wolff at the former St. Petersburg Academy of Sciences. This way, okay. Certainly, this form of biogeochemical energy is also characteristic of Homo sapiens. For man, it is, as for all other organisms, a species characteristic and seems to us invariable in the course of historical time. In other organisms, there is another form of cultural biogeochemical energy, which is unchangeable or only slightly so. This other form is manifested in the everyday life or technical conditions of life of the organisms, in their movements, in their daily existence, in the construction of the habitats, in their displacement of other organisms, in their environment, etc. As I have already noted, this energy makes up only an insignificant part of their biogeochemical energy. With man, however, the form of biochemical energy connected to reason grows and expands with time, rapidly moving to the fore. This increase is possibly related to the growth of reason itself, a process which seems to occur very slowly, if at all, but is chiefly connected to its honing and deepening in using it to consciously transform the social environment, and is especially due to the growth of scientific knowledge. Wow. I shall proceed from the fact that in the course of hundreds of thousands of years, Homo sapiens skeletons, including the craniums, do not provide a basis for considering them as belonging to a different species of man. This is assumed only on the condition that the brain of Paleolithic man was not in some fundamental way structurally distinct from the brain of contemporary man. At the same time, there can be no doubt that the mind of man during the Paleolithic period for that particular species of Homo cannot bear comparison with the mind of modern man. Hence, it follows that reason is a complex social structure, erected similarly for contemporary man as well as for Paleolithic man on the same neural substrate, but in different social circumstances that formed over time, essentially over space-time. Its explicit transformation is a fundamental element leading ultimately to the transformation of the biosphere into the noosphere, first and foremost through the creation and growth of the scientific understanding of our surroundings.
Mm-hmm.
So is he kind of saying that it was the advent of science that made the difference?
He's using
Yeah.
the term scientific understanding from the standpoint of ideas. So when you have an understanding of something, let's say it's electricity, when you understand what makes electricity work to any degree, because that degree can obviously improve, you all of a sudden have now an ability to interact with it in a way which is now makes it subject to your will and reason. And the more you have, the more you hone your understanding of it, the more scientifically defined that concept becomes. That concept then improves your power over the existence of that natural phenomenon, right? To do telecommunications, what we're doing right now, right? Involving also space tech, other things. So all of this is contingent upon millions and millions and billions of ideas, big and small. But where's the idea that allows for all of this to happen? This greater life expectancy, this greater power of communication across space and time that we all are enjoying at different parts of the world, moving at light speed, right? So the ideas that made this all happen are not actually located in the space and time. You can't calculate, like I can sort of measure where my microphone is located in space and time, relatively, but I can't locate where the ideas. This is like a fossil, right? It's like a fossil of countless concepts that allow for a greater amount of, activity, freedom, enhancement of my mind. So all of us here together, if we were living 1,000 years ago, the chances that we would have literacy and the ability to have an identity associated with our minds would be very low. Chances would be more likely that we would be like spending 13 hours, planting rice and living not that different from other beasts if we were, among the masses. So today we don't have those same expectations. We've got higher potentials because of these immaterial things called ideas. And I love this idea of free energy. So, you can see that there's a fight in the 1920s, 30s here when he's writing, just like today. He's saying that that there's a reproduction of organisms which are determined by the energetics of the planet to achieve a minimum of free energy, determined by the fundamental laws of thermodynamics. Now, those who are in opposition to Vernadsky also talk about the fundamental laws of thermodynamics, especially entropy, the second law. But their view, unlike Vernadsky, is that the natural state is to always have less free energy in the system. There is never more free energy. Whereas Vernadsky is saying every species, as well as the system as a whole, yearns for at least achieving a minimum amount of always free energy that could then, feed back into the system so that the system doesn't die, but rather lives and grows. And that's a very important concept that is, again, not allowed in modern universities, which is why you get things like the carbon reduction, right? So the idea, if you want to look at like what is behind the logic of having a new system of economics based upon reducing your carbon footprint and monetizing the profit margins to decrease the carbon footprint of human activity on the earth, it's based on that logic that it's natural that the species ultimately have less energy to sustain itself. Whereas the opposing view, if you look at what's animating the greater Eurasian partnership right now, it's the value is on the increasing powers of productivity, to have more ability to have more energy to sustain more people in the future based on your activities and what you choose to incentivize financially, whatever economic activity you want to have. So it has some fun parallels.
Matt, I would like to take 30 seconds to run to the rescue of the old farmers.
Oh, sure.
Because agriculture is a major stage of development for humankind, compared to the primitive hunter-gatherers. And we are speaking of precisely of stocking of biogeochemical energy. And those first agricultural societies made the quantum leap compared to the primitive hunter-gatherers. And let's not forget that we start for a new adventure as a species only 2 centuries ago, from that discovery at the beginning of the Neolithic, which is precisely the agricultural societies.
Agreed. And I don't want to, I hope I didn't get across the image that I was trying to disapprove of agriculture. I just wouldn't want to, like, it's like the windmill was a great innovation that,
Yes.
that saved a lot of labor hundreds of years ago, but to still use windmill energy today is can be a bit regressive if we
absolutely. I would say that it's only a stage, and it's an illustration that you are a man of the future, since you all want us to go back more than 2 centuries ago. And
yeah,
but the reducing the carbon footprints precisely is a pathetic attempt to bring us back.
Also to bring nature back too, like, because nature sees carbon dioxide as food, so we're actually striving to choke off nature from potential food it would otherwise require to maintain itself at a certain level of effectiveness. So we're actually causing the turning back of the clock on nature itself by choking it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you don't hear that in the news.
No,
No.
we're suffocating nature.
But it's true.
Yeah. Feed your forests.
Wow, you know that the most convincing argument is to show all the forests which grew lately because of CO2.
Yeah, in China and India.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, you don't even need to go into complicated scientific argumentation. Just 2 photos.
Yeah, exactly.
So what, there's more trees in India now than there used to be?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the density is obvious. Okay, so show the amount of CO2 and you show the photo corresponding to the small CO2 amount and the photo corresponding to the big CO2 amount. So it's the definite demonstration without complicated scientific argumentation that CO2 is not the lethal stuff for us.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so Quan, have you heard of, what's his name, Sargurur? He, you know, like he says the first 12 inches of our soil is so important for life.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
And he's planting trees all over the world.
Can you guys
trying to save the first 12 inches of soil?
Yes, I would say that this guy is absolutely brilliant, and I think he knows a lot of Indian philosophy, but I would be careful about him. I think he's part of the Davos group. I would have, well, I was going to say the Davos gang, but I want to stay polite, so I say Davos group or Davos crowd.
Really? Yeah.
You know, you have to be very careful with people speaking brilliantly because they can be very seductive. And let's not forget that seduction comes from Latin scere, meaning to deceive you.
Yeah. Well, his deeds are so good, you know.
No, absolutely. I watch his videos. Absolutely brilliant. But be careful.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, no.
Yeah.
I'm not. I just know that I thought the 12 inches of soil was so relevant.
Yeah.
That's all.
Wow. Harari also is absolutely brilliant.
Pardon?
As an Harari, Noah Yuval Harari, the main advisor for Klaus Schwab. Let's say he's very brilliant for entertainment, but not more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just quick on the NASA thing, and the greening of the Earth. This is a quick bit of coverage from the NASA, what's called the Earth Observatory system, which concluded just 2 years ago that the Earth is greener now than it was 20 years ago. And I think it's 5 or 10% more green biomass than we had 20 years ago. And the vast majority of that increase is due entirely to China, #1, and India, #2. And when you look at both of those countries and their industrial economic orientation, it's a pro-growth, pro-industrial growth system to the wazoo, with big projects that we used to do and we stopped doing a long time ago. So yeah, it's pretty, it disproves the idea that all human activity is intrinsically destructive to nature.
Yeah, exactly. I think that there's truly an ecological problem in the sense that we have to be careful with the rivers and with the mountains and so on. Absolutely. But we have to distinguish between ecological awareness versus climate change, okay, which is more something brought by the Davos crowd.
Mm-hmm.
I call it pollution.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't use
Well,
that word anymore.
Yeah. There's a pollution, absolutely, or to be fancy, ecological awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, like now they call it, climate change, where I don't know, back in the 70s they called it pollution.
Well, they called it weather.
Yeah, weather. Yeah. But
like we
ecology,
don't distinguish between that anymore.
Or like CO2, they call
Yeah,
CO2
but-
pollution, and that's like just, it's
yeah.
a molecule that's
Wow.
plants.
I pretend that ecology and archaeology are the two sciences of the future, but if they are well understood.
You said
What?
archaeology?
Yeah,
What's
archaeology is it's a very complex discipline combining architecture, ecology, urban management, psychology, etc. Meaning how you create an environment in which human beings would be stimulated to their maximum or optimal intellectual, emotional, and spiritual potentials.
Wow.
Yeah,
It's
nice.
called archaeology. Oh,
Yeah, ARCOLOGY.
I've never heard of them. Yeah,
Yeah,
well, that's good to know.
yeah, sure.
All right.
And we are all potential ecologists.
Yes. That's right.
I think he might have been taking a little bit of a shot as well. In a lot of Vernadsky's writings, he's doing battle with the Darwinian interpretation of the survival of the fittest doctrine in natural selection. And he's often interfacing with he's got many opponents, but one of the big ones is Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who had set up what was called the proof of the missing link in 1911. He was part of the team that so-called discovered the Piltdown Man as the missing link between apes and human beings. It turns out it was a giant fraud. They just pasted together some dog teeth onto a human skull and painted it and dyed it. But it was very, very influential in the 20s and 30s as the thing that would prove empirically Darwin to be true. because Darwin, is talking about these gradual, slow modifications, which you don't see in the fossil records. You see instead these leaps, discontinuous leaps in fossil records. You don't see gradualistic change. So part of the argument was that, you've got the Piltdown man, you have the Peking man. Also, Pierre de Chardin was a part of that fraudulent operation too in China. And in each case, they're having all of these conclusions about the size of the brain density, all of these things that would determine the subspecies that wouldn't be human. And Vernadsky is just getting across that no, if it falls under this category of Homo, regardless of whether you want to call it Piltdown or whatever, it would have certain noetic attributes that are maybe different in power, but there's the same quality that you would have if they make tools, if they are able to relate to nature by utilizing fire, for example, which is more than the materialists are all just trying to measure the size. They want to weigh things. They want to render everything into number and then come up with their analysis. And he's saying, no, you got to look at what does it do? How does it relate to its environment to come up with an idea of, are you dealing with noetic or something simply biospheric as a being?
Well, I think that Teilhard somehow he may have been associated with that. I'm not, because I remember him talking about that, but
he led it.
He's more closer to this guy.
So tell me, we don't have to go into that right now, but I will tell you, I've researched it. He led that operation, both scams. He was a leading figure in both operations, which is very, it's provable. It's not a theory. It's provable.
Well, no, I'm not disputing that. Okay, anyways, let's go on because that's not.
Satomi, I suspect that you are sensible to brilliant man speaking with ease and a sense of spiritual profundity, like Satguru Pierre de Chardin.
Yes.
So beware, Satomi, of that kind of man.
Seductive.
Well, anyways, I'm not going to say, I mean, let's just go on and learn more about this guy because, yes, I just love his humanity.
You want to go for number 104?
The creation of our planet of cultural biogeochemical energy appears to be a fundamental fact of its geological history. The way was prepared in the course of all geological time. The fundamental determining process here is the maximum expression of the human mind. But in essence, this is inextricably linked with the totality of all biogeochemical energy of living matter. By means of the migration of atoms in living processes, life bundles together into a single whole all the migrations of atoms in the non-living matter of the biosphere. Organisms are alive only until the material and energetic exchange between them in the surrounding biosphere ceases. In the biosphere, certain grand chemical circulatory processes of atomic migrations appear, in which living organisms are involved as a lawful, inseparable, and often fundamental part of the process. These processes remain unchanged in the course of geological time. For instance, the migration of the atoms of magnesium forming into chlorophyll has gone on uninterrupted for at least 2 billion years through countless genetically interconnected generations of green organisms. Living organisms continuously and inseparably connected to the biosphere through such migration of atoms alone constitute a lawful part of its structure. This must never be forgotten in our scientific study of life and in our scientific judgments regarding life's manifestation in nature. We must not neglect to take into account that this indissoluble material and energetic link of living organisms with the biosphere, a link of completely distinct character, which is geologically eternal and may be expressed with scientific accuracy, is always present in any of our scientific approaches to living things, and must be reflected in all of our logical conclusions and deductions concerning them. Whew, that's pretty a lot to unpack there. Coming to the study of the geochemistry of the biosphere, we must above all precisely estimate the logical importance of that connection, which must necessarily enter into all of our constructs regarding life. It is independent of our will and cannot be excluded from our experiments and observations. It must always be taken into account as something fundamental that is inherent in living things. In this way, the biosphere, without exception, must be reflected in all of our scientific judgments. It must be manifest in every scientific experiment and observation, and in all a human individual's deliberation, and in all speculations from which a human individual, even in his thought, cannot refrain. The mind cannot therefore be manifest to the maximum degree only under conditions of the maximum development of the fundamental form of human biogeochemical energy. That is, under the condition of man's maximum degree of reproduction.
Okay, so note 7, the complete absence of exchanges in dormant forms of life cannot yet be considered verified. It is extremely slow and perhaps in some cases of atomic migrations actually absent. This becomes noticeable only in geological time.
What would you call dormant forms of life?
Not active.
You mean like a seed?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
Because yeah, you can get a seed. They've found these old, like, what is it, 15,000 or older even seeds, right, in Siberia that were preserved in little clay pots, and they found that after all of these millennia, they were able to bring them back to life and have them sprout. At which point, it's actualizing the potential, and all of a sudden, you have now a flow of going out of and coming into that plant or flower that would not have been an interactivity when it was in seed format, right? It would have been much more, a closed shell.
Yeah, but nutrient-wise, I hear seeds are very potent.
You mean
eating this, like apricot seeds are supposed to be so good for you. It actually, if you've got cancer, they say that's one of the best.
Oh, I see.
You know what I'm saying? So there's some, it's dormant, but it's I think the nutrient intensity in that seed must be pretty potent. Like I think we don't take into consideration that.
But I guess then at that point, when it's being consumed by another organism, it's now changing its character. It's no longer really just a seed as a seed. It's now all of a sudden chemically reacting to the metabolic power of whatever organism eats it, right? And consumes its nutrients into its own workings, its own cell functions.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden it is in a certain sense now changing its quality and being absorbed into the biosphere in a way it wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah. It's kind of like a living matter now. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that in the biosphere, certain grand chemical circulatory processes of atomic migrations appear in which living organisms are involved as a lawful, inseparable, and often fundamental part of the process. And these processes remain unchanged in the course of geological time. For example, in the migration of atoms of magnesium forming into chlorophyll, which has gone on uninterrupted for 2 billion years or more. So you have all of this change going on over this time, but you have this invariant quality of magnesium and going into chlorophyll to do something, right? To have a purpose. So it gets you at this idea that there is purpose and design built into everything that does exist the way it does and not some other way for a reason. Which again, the atheists will freak out when they hear this sort of language. they emotionally will go into a bit of a rage fit because everything is supposed to be random.
Yeah.
Well, I think there are two ideas here: the top-down organization versus the bottom-up organization, and the axial or the structural principle that is needed for the bottom-up organization is precisely stochastic. How can I say, laws? But it's strange to say stochastic laws. Stochastic dimension.
What do you mean stochastic?
Randomness. Okay, you put amino acid in a soup, and you have some bond of lining in the amino acid, and by a strange miracle, something called life emerge from that soup of amino acid and some bones of lightning. Okay, so the invisible principle or invisible dimensions, because I don't want to say stochastic laws, it's completely absurd. And that's the stochastic dimension needed to justify the bottom-up organization rather than the top-bottom organization, from the ideas to matter.
But you got to be careful with that too, because a lot of the things we thought were random from much of human experience, we find that upon further analysis, as knowledge increases of the relationship of like you're in the middle of a storm. Sometimes it seems like everything is random and you don't see any rhyme or rhythm. But then when you take a look down from a satellite down onto the earth and you see that there's a structure to the hurricane, you see that there is, there are these top-down ordering processes that were always there, but you're only appreciating it, after some discoveries are made. So
yes,
maybe there is no such thing, maybe, as ultimate stochasticism or randomness.
That's why I would say that it's an invention that is absolutely necessary to justify the bottom-up organization. Blind self-organization. That's the exact expression. Okay, because that's the religion of the new science.
Yes, I hear what you're saying.
Blind self-organization.
I got you.
And you need theologically or philosophically, you need to introduce that stochastic thing to build up all the structure of a blind self-organization.
Mm-hmm.
I always kind of thought that randomness and order is, to me, it's the same thing. It's just looking at it from a different side. Can you elaborate on that a bit more? I don't see that in my mind, so maybe you can explain how you're thinking about it. Randomness, like things that just happen, like disorder. To me, disorder and order it's the same thing. That's what I want you to explain a little bit more, because I don't see that in my mind, how disorder and order are the same thing. I was hoping you could elaborate on that a bit more. Well, I'm not sure how to elaborate. You're just well, you kind of just said it just before. It's like you're in that hurricane and everything's all kind of crazy and you don't know what you're thinking, but when you look at it from the outside, there's an order to it. Oh, I hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I understand how you're thinking now. I didn't mean, but of course we don't want to say that they're the same thing. It's just that from the standpoint of perception, what you perceive, which is not reality, right? What we perceive may or may not be real. But the perception of somebody in the middle of the tornado might see chaos or hurricane.
Yes.
And then the perception of somebody who gets outside of the system and looks down, they realize, oh, that's actually not what I thought it was. It's actually organized by something ordered and that I can wrap my mind around. So it's not the same thing.
It depends, if I may interrupt.
Yeah.
Once again, of my obsession with Plato, it depends of your epistemological perception. Okay, if you're in the midst of the storm, you might be overwhelmed by your sense perception, which is the first level of epistemological development, and that's okay. But if you're at the level of dianoia or mathematical form, or of dialecticon, of seeing things as a global in a global manner, you would see the order. So I think that it's a question of reality as seen at different epistemological levels, and they coexist. But the higher realities is closer to the reality with the capital R.
You guys want to see where else? We want to do one more section before we close it out for tonight? All right, so Tomi, you're up.
Okay. The potential possibility of the expansion over the surface of the entire planet by the multiplication of a single organism, of a single species, is proper to all species. Since for all of them, the law of reproduction is expressed in one and the same form, in the form of a geometrical progression. I have long emphasized the fundamental significance of this phenomenon for biogeochemistry, and I shall return to it in its proper place in this book. It is evident.
Sorry. Yeah, go on.
Okay. It is evident that the phenomenon of the expansion over the entire surface of the planet by a single species developed widely in the case of aquatic life, such as microscopic plankton in lakes and rivers, and some form of microbes, essentially also aquatic, on the cover of the planet's surface and disseminated through the troposphere. Disseminated. For larger organisms, we observe this almost in full measure with certain plants. For man, this begins to be seen in our time. By the 20th century, the entire globe and all the seas have been encompassed by man. Owing to the progress of communications, mankind is able to be in continual contact with the entire world, nowhere solitary or helplessly lost in the immensity of Earth's nature. Now the Earth's human population has reached the previous unprecedented figure of nearly 2 billion people. Despite the losses incurred by wars, starvation, and disease, which continuously afflict hundreds of millions of people, and which have seriously retarded the course of that progress, it will require, however, only an insignificant amount of time in geological terms, barely more than a few hundred years, for such relics of barbarism to cease. This could, of course, be accomplished even now. The possibility lies within man's grasp, and a will informed by reason will inevitably embark on this path, since it corresponds to the natural thrust of the geological process. This is even more the case as the opportunities for doing this are rapidly, almost spontaneously increasing. The real significance of the popular masses, which have endured these sufferings more than anyone, is irrepressibly growing. The number of people inhabiting our planet began to increase approximately 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, when man became less constrained by the shortage of food with the development of agriculture. Presumably, at that time, around 10,000 to 18,000 years ago, the first leap in man's reproduction took place. G.F. Nicolai in 1918-1919 attempted to quantitatively determine the actual multiplication of man in the development of agriculture, that is, man's real colonization of the planet. In this committee, in this calculation, which encompassed the entire landmass of the globe, there were 11.4 people per square kilometers, which constituted 2.10% to 4% of the possible colonization. Taking into account the energy received from the sun, agriculture made it possible to support 150 people on 1 square kilometer. That is on the entire land area of the globe. You can support a population of 22.5 billion individuals. That is 22 to 24 times the number that now inhabit it. But man obtains energy for nourishment and subsistence not only from agricultural labor. Taking into consideration that possibility, Nicolai made a rough estimate that starting from the historic epoch begun in our time, utilizing new energy sources, Earth could support a population of 3 trillion people. That is more than 10 million times greater than the present population. Now, after more than 20 years have passed since Nicolai made his calculations, these figures ought to be greatly increased, since man may now use a source of energy to which Nicolai in 1917 to 1990 gave no thought, namely the energy connected to the atomic nucleus. We should now more simply say that the source of energy subject to man's reason in this energetic epoch of the life of man on which we have now embarked is practically unlimited. From this, it is also clear that cultural biogeochemical energy possesses the same quality. In the calculation of Nicolai in his day, machines increased the energy of man more than tenfold. We can now give a more precise figure.
We cannot now.
We cannot now give a more precise figure. Yet recent estimates by the American Geological Committee indicate that the hydroelectric power utilized now over the entire globe had reached, by the end of 1936, the level of 60 million horsepower. Within 16 years, it had increased by 160%, chiefly in North America. As a result, we must increase the calculation of Nicolai, can't pronounce that, by more than 1.5 times. Actually, all of those calculations of the future expressed in numbers are not significant, since our knowledge of the energy available to mankind may be said to be rudimentary. Certainly, the energy available to man is not unlimited, is not an unlimited quantity, as it is limited by the dimensions of the biosphere. These also define the limits of cultural biogeochemical energy. We will see that there is even a limit to the fundamental biogeochemical energy of mankind, namely the speed of the transmission of life, the limit of the reproduction of man. The speed of colonization, the quantity V, essentially considered by Nicolai, is based on actual observations of the colonization of the planet by man under clear, inauspicious conditions of life. In addition, we will furthermore see that there exists some phenomena in the biosphere yet unknown to us, but powerful in a given geological era and under certain conditions of the ecosystem, which lead to a stationary maximum number of individuals per hectare. Hectare. Okay. But gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
what he says. Like, why is nobody, how many trillion? I mean, we're thinking with what we got, what, 7 billion is too much?
Yeah.
Well, it's too much with a certain mentality.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it requires a different culture to be activated in order to see this as a blessing, right? 7 billion or 20 billion or more. There's no the choice to see that as a bad thing is really just a question of perspective and epistemological perception, like Quan was saying. If you choose to see it as a blessing, it requires a different type of culture with a different idea of art, a different standard of judging music, of science, of also everything else we take for granted, that has to see why having this many people in existence is actually a wonderful, good thing, not a bad thing.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder how he came to those calculations, though. I mean, okay, he was what, living in the early part of the century, right?
Well, this guy is 1918, 1919.
Yeah, and what, is he a Russian?
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Ukrainian, I think.
Oh, Ukrainian, yeah.
This Nikolai guy?
I think so. Oh no, Vernadsky.
Oh, Vernadsky is Russian, but is he Ukrainian? I know he set up the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, but I don't know if he himself was Ukrainian per se. Maybe.
I think he was born there. I'm not sure. Maybe not.
Well, Ukraine.
I know
produced a lot of
he
geniuses.
was brought up there.
Yeah. I hope I won't sound too flippant, but one solution to it is that Ukraine means the border. So the border to what? The border to Russia.
Yes, that's true. That's true. And I don't know about the number, like when he's talking about numbers in terms of the estimates of 22.5 billion. I mean, these are rough estimates, right? Like these aren't things you could chart down to the mathematical absolute truth, but it's a rough sketch. It's a rough sketch.
But anyway, we don't need to jump from 7 billion to 3 trillion. We can take times for that.
Yeah. It won't happen overnight.
Yeah, not in our lifetime.
Or even 22.5 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could support a pot, and that would be 150 people on 1 square kilometer. I can't, kilometer. I don't even know what that is.
It's not that big. I mean, but you can, if organized well, you could have a very, very well organized, high population density area with, I don't know what, I mean, Shanghai is 26 million people for a city. It's a very well organized city when there's no, when there's no crazy lockdown happening. It's a very beautiful, well organized city.
Yes.
Probably. I wonder what the per capita square kilometer population density is there.
Well, the core of Shanghai is about 6,000 square kilometers.
Okay.
So you take 26 million divided by 6,000 square kilometers. So it's smaller than Beijing.
Who's good at math? What's that number? I'm bad at math.
You can go on your iPad,
right,
and make a calculator.
Yes, you're right.
So 26 million.
Yeah, divided by.
Divided by 6,000 square kilometers. It gives it gives about 4,333 people per square kilometers.
What?
4,333 people per square kilometers, and it's not so many people, because if you have high-rise towers, it's very possible.
Obviously, we wouldn't want that in every square kilometer of the Earth, I don't think. But the fact that is comfortable and doable in
Yeah.
is interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And it's not
Wow.
like there's any
And-
shortage of green spaces. When you look at images of Shanghai, there's tons of well-organized parks and green spaces all over the place.
Yeah.
So you don't have to just
Yeah,
like
and
pave over the earth.
and Shanghai is precisely a city organized according to ecology. When they have vegetables grown on the 50th floor, for example, it's one application of ecology.
Hmm.
Or in Berlin too, and in Shanghai also, they are what they are called sponge cities. A sponge cities is a city organized according to certain architectural principles when they will retain the water from the rain and when share that water inside the city according to some ecological principles.
That's wild. That's so cool. Right.
Mhm.
Because like the streets are designed with some sort of a molecule in their concrete that just absorbs it, right? So you don't get flooding.
Exactly. Or the sewer systems are organized in a very sophisticated way to drain the rainwater into reservoir. And from those reservoirs, the water would be shared into different neighborhoods or departments of Shanghai.
It's interesting.
No, it's a very complex urban organization and management.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you see, I just made a calculation for Hong Kong. Hong Kong is about 7 million people divided by 1,100 square kilometers. And the density is higher than Shanghai because the density is 6,363 people per square kilometers.
Hard to believe.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh.
Isn't it amazing when you look at real things
Mhm.
and imagine that are actually happening, existing.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that-
Cynthia had done her there are no limits to growth presentation for the Reiner Fulmick event, and she had
Yeah.
one of her slides that had Texas, and you could, based on the area of Texas, you could take the 8 billion people alive on the earth and give each person a big townhouse with a plot of land, and fit them all into Texas, just that one state, the whole world population as it currently is, which puts it in perspective, right? It really changes how you think about this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
see,
Wow.
people, we don't get that kind of images, and so that that's the thing with words. Wow, you could get so thinking, wow,
Mhm.
when you just thinking of words, but when you put the words with the picture,
Yeah.
this is why they probably don't never show you photos. These what do you call those guys that are debunking the population? What do you call them?
Fact check.
The Davos crowd,
The Davos,
depopulation people,
yeah, the Davos
or
crowd. If
eugenics
you want to,
people. Mm,
yeah, yeah,
The sub.
yeah, exactly.
yeah. Well, they really need to. I don't know why Putin doesn't bring this guy out.
Well,
Start getting somebody that's a student, a disciple of this guy, and just start showing this. He probably not maybe aware.
Well, what is it?
well,
Oh, go on.
sorry. I only wanted to say he has a certain mentality, and that mentality cannot be cured by classical psychiatry or classical psychology. It's something quite difficult to cure that kind of pathology.
Hard labor and forced reading Plato over years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing. Who was that Egyptian king that was just brilliant? He was brought in the monotheism and stuff. You don't even, they just erased one very important pharaoh from history, the Egyptian history.
Akhenaten. Akhenaten.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? They can actually erase a memory.
They try. But he's
Yeah.
can't be ignored. Ultimately, he's
Well, I mean, that I'm
but
trying
they're
to.
trying. Yeah, no, they're trying to completely erase our collective memory of anything good that would challenge their power.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you really see that when you hear about things like that. And even, you know, my favorite, Nikola Tesla, I mean, you never hear about him.
Mm.
Hmm.
Well, it's part of culture, right? Once again, I would like to show off my little pedantic side because once again, culture comes from Latin colere, and colere in Latin means to worship. And a culture is the choice to worship certain principles. Okay, if you worship the principle of depopulation or eugenics, it would have certain consequences.
Mhm.
If you choose to worship the ideas in the dialogues written by Plato, it will have other consequences. Okay, so it's an aware or an unaware or a less aware choice because all choices have a certain degree of awareness, but certain choices uh, are connected, associated with higher awareness.
Right. Right.
I would just like to say one thing. At the beginning of the calculations for energy and population, it mentioned about the energy from the sun for sustenance of agriculture and population. When we look at today, the whole global warming push is to block off the sun, and we need less sun and so forth. So you can see it's total opposite to what is being said here.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's not just that they're trying to shut down carbon dioxide, they're actually trying to block out the sun on top of it. Another abuse against the biosphere. Yeah, no, it's like the culture of death. I mean, you're dealing with a culture of death versus a culture of life. I mean, when you look at it from the standpoint, the oligarchies organized themselves around a culture of decay, which is decay is a characteristic of a dead body. Growth, is the function that you see characteristic of a living body. They may look the same, right? Somebody who's just been killed a second ago versus the person who's alive right next to them. They might have very similar attributes, very different systemic, very different organizational, process going on and how they relate to a biosphere or a culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the perfect, analogy, metaphor, whatever, life and death. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very
Yeah.
apt.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
Bill Gates is putting what is it, a 40-50 million dollars so far for the first phase of the prototypes, this project to try to reduce the sun's light into the biosphere by like 5% or something is the goal, by spreading these carbon particles into the upper atmosphere.
Yeah.
Insane.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Incredible. And metaphorically, since Plato called truth the sun of the absolute, they try to block the physical suns because in their heart they cannot reach the sun of the absolute.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, they like the shadows instead.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's fucked up. No, that's apt. Well, guys, so I think we're about halfway through. I think next Wednesday we should be able to finish this essay. I'd like to read the following essay as well, again by Vernadsky, before we. In my mind, I really want to get across Henry C. Carey. I'm hoping to pick one or two essays by Lincoln's advisor, the brilliant Henry C. Carey, who I was reviewing a little bit of his work, The Unity of Law, published in 1871. And in this beautiful book, he's taking direct aim at Malthus, at Darwin, at John Stuart Mill, James, like the whole Ricardo. It's wonderful how holistic this person who is the leading figure working to spread this new system of political economy around the world. So I'd like to read his writings a little bit, keeping in mind also Vernadsky's father was a teacher of political science who taught Henry C. Carey translations of Carey in Russian to Russian students. And in the Vernadsky household, they had a painting of Abraham Lincoln in when he was growing up in the 1870s, 1880s in his house. So that's a beautiful, beautiful, rich irony. And the fact that Vernadsky's teacher, Dmitry Mendeleev, was studying, had gone to America, right, in 1876, had studied the American system, had brought it back, and became the chairman of the Committee of the Protective Tariff, where he worked very closely with Frederick List, another American system advocate, the finance minister of Russia, to build the industrial and other rail development projects of Eurasia. So it all comes together so beautifully and organically when you look at it from both their ideas of these individuals, but also what are they actually a part of as part of a global conspiracy for the good. It's a really beautiful tapestry. So we'll hopefully do that. And then I'm hoping in a few weeks' time, we can maybe read 1 or 2 items by LaRouche, who's the reason why I know of any of this stuff to begin with is because I studied LaRouche's writings on physical economy. And he brings up these characters. I wanted to know who they were. So, you know, you read their writings and it makes a lot of sense. So maybe that'll be part of the sequencing going forward.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, some of the men in America that kept that country, I think that America does have such a purpose and a destiny. Has it fulfilled itself? I just really have that strong sense. And, you know, you mentioned men like that, these beacons.
Yep. All right, guys. So it's a pleasure, and I'll catch everybody definitely on Wednesday. And this Sunday, we're going to have a class by Larry Freeman on FDR's vision for humanity, especially with a focus on Africa. So that'll be Sunday at 2 p.m. And anybody you know in your networks, you could feel free to spread the Zoom link after we send it out this week. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Have
Bye.
a good night.
Thanks, Con,
Good night.
for your
Take care.
input.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.